When we fixate on AI or the tech sector, what we want to do is just make it a good place to run a company, be a good place to live, right? An employee who has, is not worried about who can get GP appointment quickly, can be back in work quickly. We need to fixate on AI, obviously, but we also need to fixate on just being a great place to build a company, a great place to live. And that in itself, I think, will end up giving us this fantastic ecosystem.
Welcome everyone to the next episode of the LFG podcast with myself, James, and Becca Ray. We're excited today to have Ben Warner with us, co-founder of Electric Twin. Really exciting and interesting company, which will go into really at the forefront of using AI and tech in the UK. Can't wait to dive into those topics. Going to be covering so many interesting areas today, from your time in government, from the UK tech scene to obviously Electric Twin and AI and that as a sector. But if we can kick off, Ben, with just kind of doing a LinkedIn summary of your background, and you've got a fascinating background. So you've got a PhD in physics from UCL, great university, my old place as well. You did a research fellowship at UCL as well. You turned into data science, polling, working in number 10 as the Chief Data and Digital Science Officer for the PM, and now starting Electric Twin. What's kind of been your guiding force, driving force, kind of lead and path to all of that?
Well, I started off as you said, in physics at the London Centre for Nanotechnology in UCL, and I loved it. I loved the experiments, I loved physics, I loved everything about it. Sort of in my heart, I wanted to be a physics professor. And about that time, Mark, my brother, set up what was called ASI Data Science, now called Faculty, with one of his very good friends from school, but also Angie Marr, who worked at the London Centre Nanotechnology with us. So I actually went they used to do a fellowship program for transitioning PhDs into data science, and I went to learn how to do data science because I thought it'd be really useful for my physics career. I thought at the time maybe AI is going to be something that might be a big thing, and it might be usul to know something about that if I'm going to physics. Yeah. Well, Mark set up the AI company. I was just learning about it for physics, so I can't claim all the credit. But then, sort of when I was working and learning about data science, I started working on some of the little projects that they were working on, and I loved it. And actually, it turns out I preferred sort of the real world and trying to explain and understand the real world much more than physics experiments. So then that's really the truth of it, is that I just like trying to put myself. I just like situations where you're trying to solve these really, really hard, complex problems around human behavior. I just don't think we actually understand the world as much as we think, and so there's a sort of like much greater sort of opportunity to discover new stuff, and the low-hanging fruits are far lower to the ground than physics, where you're into string theory and quantum chronodynamics and all this stuff before you're even off the ground.
Well, I imagine like physics in a university can be quite a political place as well. I mean, academia is, people talk about it now, and it seems to have changed a lot since. I don't know if you've got any kind of opinions on that, or.
Yeah, I think that academia is a weird one because we talk about it sort of like as sort of universities, but really, sort of like the people I worked with was the centre, and then, my supervisor and the postdocs I worked with. And I was lucky enough to have a brilliant supervisor and an amazing postdoc. Both of them were incredible, sort of who looked after me, mentored me, pushed me, gave me feedback. That really sort of meant that PhD experience was phenomenally useful. I wouldn't be where I am today without that. But if you look at colleagues in exactly the same centre with different supervisors, they met their supervisor once a term. So I think that's the randomness of academia, the political nature of academia, I think really does affect some people. And I was just lucky enough to work with these incredibly talented people.
Yeah, I really like the and obviously it's a big part of Electric Twin, right? Of like understanding people and behaviours. And I'm sure you saw a lot of behaviours, decision making, etc., in the centre of government, because obviously you were brought in Boris Johnson's time in end of 2019, right? Data and digital was your kind of remit, and like everything with Boris Johnson's premiership, COVID happened very rapidly and kind of upended it all. What was, just kind of walk us through that experience from someone who was in the heart of it right there. You'd come in, obviously, you had this majority, lots of opportunity, and now you were at the real kind of sharp end of some of the most difficult decisions and discussions in government. what's kind of the good and the bad that you saw that you can talk about?
I think, sort of like the way you described it is a little bit like, sort of, as though it was an episode of The West Wing, which at times it was like you're walking down the staircase chatting to people and then you meet somebody else and you walk along and you think, geez, this is really cool. It's like in The West Wing. You probably mentioned this is like in The West Wing. But actually...
Did that make it less cool?
Yeah. But it was still cool.
Yeah.
But actually, I think that the truth is that sort of your experience in these times is much more human. Like I actually turn up. I never found out my title was chief advisor on data and digital till a couple of months before I left, when HR started interacting with me about how I left.
You're joking.
I didn't really have a team. I didn't really have a remit. I didn't have a desk when I turned up. I sort of was interacting with people who I didn't really know what my role was. I accidentally got a civil service team to work on a paper because I said it would be good for you to think about this, not realizing that in the civil service, good for you to think about this means please do it.
That means you prioritize it above all else.
Yeah, which is not what I meant. I meant the words, you should think about it. And so, I'm slowly learning, and I was lucky enough to be able to get, talk to some people before I went into number 10. And also I think that, there's a huge conversation about civil service reform, but there's also a conversation about how good some of the people are in number 10. They are amazing people, especially, sort of the private office, some of the people I worked with. And somebody gave me the advice that if you talk to the private office, they're going to help you do it if they agree. And if they disagree, they're going to stop you doing it, and you don't know why. So you might as well just tell them what you're doing. And so over those sort of early months, I was lucky enough to build relationships, learn how sort of government works, and then, we hit sort of February happening, and we start working on COVID. And it's weird just sort of how chance events work. So, for instance, me and Patrick were talking about some science meeting, and as we were walking out, I said to him, "Oh, COVID looks like a thing. Can you send me any information I should read just so I'm informed?" And I think he said, or maybe I said, but I think he said, "Well, why don't you come to Sage?" So I just went to Sage. This wasn't a thing at the time. It was 12 people in a meeting room, saw my name next to the professors, and I thought to myself, this is cool. Like, these are, when I was an academic, right, you meeting these aren't professors. These are often titled professors, ran centres, I'm phenomenally successful academics, phenomenally good. And so then, I was just through these chance events, suddenly I'm in a position where the sort of information is coming together. And
can you explain what SAGE is?
SAGE is the Science Advisory Group for emergencies. That's where the same comes from. So technically it advises COBRA, but over the course of COVID, it became sort of like Patrick Vallance did an incredible job just sort of making it so that there was the best possible use of science in government. I think that's one of the interesting things about sort of COVID is that there are rightly criticisms around how government did its policy making and how it did its modelling and how we could improve on that. I think unfairly people talk about it, not realising that's the high watermark. So however you think COVID's use of science, COVID's use of modelling went, that's the high watermark. For any other policy in government, it will almost certainly have less expertise, less resources, less data, being involved and thrown at it. So we're in this sort of February, March period where it just seems like the plan is crazy, and everyone's telling us we're the best prepared country in the world. And it's really hard to say, I don't think we are. And I take notes in meetings just to help me pay attention, understand, and I can look back at my notes and see like people saying that there's PPE, there's all this stuff. Famously there was the thing around the chicken pox parties and people saying maybe we should have chicken pox parties, and I was saying we don't think that's a good idea, Prime Minister. Like it's a bit different to chicken pox. And in the end, we actually have this sort of meeting on the Saturday where we talk the Prime Minister, where I talk the Prime Minister through, what our plan actually entails. So, Dom is the person who instigates this meeting. He's the one who sits the Prime Minister down. Mark, my brother's in there, which was really useful because, it's good to have somebody when you're talking through the Prime Minister who's actually going to say, no, Ben, you're wrong on this. And, we'd all sort of spoken through this plan. And, that's the thing is that, and you can see the whiteboards of just sort of like, here's what the consequence of your plan is. Here's what, the plan says. And it's essentially break the NHS. according to all the modelling that we had. And then after that, it was just a matter of sort of pumps, sort of all hands to the pumps. Interesting, that's actually when I met my founder. The founder for Electric Twin co-founder is Alex Cooper, and he was one of the first people brought in. He's 20 years in the military, known as one of the best operators. And so when we were sort of thinking about how we fixed the UK plan, because it was wrong, he was one of the first people to be sort of press ganged in from his career, retiring for his peaceful life and he was actually the person who ended up ramping up a lot of the testing capability in the UK. And I think there's a lot of really, really untold stories of people coming in and doing hugely successful efforts within COVID. The vaccine task force is often talked about as the sort of highlight, but there's a lot of others, truly tremendous stories. But there's also, on the other side, truly horrific stories where we really need to learn our lessons.
But it must be, it must have been so terrifying to kind of stand up there and put your case forward of why. I mean, it's a huge situation that's going to have consequences on everyone. There's obviously the opposite side. If you don't say it, it could be worse. But there's an element of like huge bravery there.
I think the bravest person is Don, right? He was the one who said, "Prime Minister, you've got to get in a room and talk through this," right? That's sort of like where the true bravery. I think it's actually quite easy to talk through the science that a lot of very thoughtful people have put together, talked about. And then there was other people in the room, but the true bravery there is really him saying, "No, we're going to have this meeting. We're going to put I'm going to say this is important, Prime Minister." For me, it was just a matter of talking through the science. It's what I've done all my life.
It's if anyone hasn't worked in government and like you have this kind of view of the system and machinery of government, right? That it should be operating at a way in which if your senior leaders, your prime minister, etc., feeding down to organisations like SAGE, DHSC, etc., and asking these kind of questions, and then those feeding back up, and you get this kind of well-rounded plan. But as you're kind of highlighting here, actually, one of the things that completely pivot us out of the disastrous trajectory was a meeting pushed by a single advisor, and then a group of you go in and kind of raise the alarm. And that just shows like the influence that individuals can have on a huge government agenda. Was that a surprise to you? Did you go in thinking this is how it operates, or was it something you've kind of learned through your process of going, actually, government functions, you can have a very small group of people who can make this kind of outsized effect on the wider system?
I think individuals can have huge effects within government in certain times and certain moments, particularly in crisis when the system collapses. But there's also huge numbers of stories where we failed, where we got nothing done, where we tried to do something and it just or it hugely bogged down, never really quite worked. The efforts that were put in, involved in setting up ARIA, the efforts behind the scenes, getting involved in that, pushing that through. That looks like a very different story. That is not the story of a couple of advisors having a meeting and suddenly things happening. That is a story of a large number of people putting in a huge amount of effort. And then even after I left, there were still people there putting in a huge sort of effort just to keep it on the tracks. So I think, it's really important when we think of government, we don't think of it as either or. In different situations, in different worlds, it can be, there are always opportunities to exploit and have a massive impact. I set up the number 10 data science team, and we were in one meeting around digital and data, and I talked about the President's Fellows, which is the Innovation Fellows, which is like a US program where they get very talented people in to work in government about digital and tech. And somebody, Alex Chisholm, said, I think that's a good idea. And then suddenly two people on my team, a person called James Goot, just sort of pushed it forward. And actually, I was the Labour government has expanded on it and pushed it forward, and this is a really successful thing. And the things that those innovation fellows have succeeded in is amazing. Some of them haven't done so well, some of them have done incredibly. So that's an example of just how small things can occur and small things can change. There are lots of examples where, we try and do something and nothing happens, just sort of hits the treacle.
And what, from your perspective, like where did you see any patterns in like what was a good predictor of something? Like, I mean, from our side, it was often political capital. If a politician was willing to expend a fair amount of political capital, that gave you some traction. But there wasn't like always a rhyme and reason to it. I mean, the Ukraine war stuff, crisis very similar to COVID, but it hit a load of weird roadblocks, which from the outside, again, you'd be like, this should be something which you can storm through. What about from your side?
I mean, for a lot of the stuff that I was doing, especially on digital and data, it was more sort of internal focused. So it's not so much, sort of a big P political capital, more small P political capital. I was very, very lucky in that people like Anthony Finkelstein, Ian Diamond, Patrick Vallance, really sort of supported the agenda and just sort of they helped out. So, for instance, 10DS was set up because Ian Diamond lent us some ONS data scientists, just so suddenly it went from 0 to 1. So usually it's that sort of thing is, can you create a coalition of the willing, find a path through where the people who want change, because there are people who want change in this sort of service. You see, sometimes people talk about a blob or a monolith, and that's obviously not true. There's some really empowered people, really good people, really trying to get things forward. And so sometimes, sometimes my role was to do nothing else than just try and create enough cover or enough opportunity for them. I'm not doing any of the work. I'm just sort of creating a space for them. And so really it was a massive team effort where it worked, and then where it failed, it was also a massive team effort. And sometimes it just didn't work out. Like, you try your best, you try, lots of different sort of things, but it would just, sort of peter out. You couldn't quite find the way through to get it to happen.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I always find it interesting talking to people on a special advisor side, because the frustration you would have from a civil service side can often be like political cover, feeling like there's a clear objective and what you're driving towards, or just like ability from the political realm to unblock things. But equally, I know from the reverse side, it's also like civil service inertia. You should think about this, and that seemingly becomes the entire pipeline of work for the next 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit of an odd special advisor, because actually they tried to change me from being a special advisor to an expert advisor. And I said to them that I don't really care. What's the difference? And they said, well, we're going to knock your pay down, but don't worry, there's a committee that's going to sit in 6 weeks and they'll probably put it back up. I said, no, let's not do that. Let's wait until you say to me what my pay is and what the role is. And then COVID hit and everyone got bored, so I stayed as a special advisor. But yeah, I mean, I was never in a place to, sometimes the civil servants would ask me like, oh, does so-and-so, what do they think of this? And I'd say, who's that? And they're like, oh, that person. I'm like, oh, sorry. So I mean, my background is nothing to do with politics. It's much more data science. So yeah, in that way, sometimes I really let the team down. We'd have to go ask another spat. What actually, can you do my job on that bit?
To be honest, I don't think that's unusual in the SPAD world. It's a really tricky job. But just also being in the intersection, right, where you have this, like the PAD, the political appointed kind of civil servant, not special advisor, which is probably fairly more similar to what you were.
I mean, I think that's a really good idea. I think that at the moment we ask ministers to do an impossible job, and actually having people around you that you can trust and ask questions of, I think is really important. I think that the best ministers actually often have those very trusted advisors or those trusted civil servants they've worked with a long time. You often see them shifting with the minister and playing that sort of role within the system. And I think actually, I mean, when I talked earlier about sort of the private office, working with the private office, that's essentially what I'm doing, right? I'm working alongside a civil servant. And I think that's one of the things that we need to enable more in the civil service, is actually creating those teams, with the right expertise, both of Whitehall specialists. I think Whitehall is a specialism. There are great people at it, and they enable you to do so much. You just don't need a whole team of them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, fantastic. Yeah, we should dive into the future of the tech sector and the kind of lean on the stuff you were talking about just there. Of obviously, you bringing in things like the fellowship, etc., into UK government. It'd be great also to talk about the wider kind of UK tech sector and what the future of that looks like, could look like, potentially on what risks there could be as well to it.
I guess it'd be nice to start with why you wanted to kind of enter the tech sector and kind of go at it on your, well, not on your own because you've got a co-founder, but made you want to set up a business and go for that?
I think so. In COVID, we couldn't predict how people would behave. We didn't have the right tools. We couldn't build policies. We couldn't simulate it. There's this famous quote that Dom said about how everyone thinks at the center of government there's a door, and behind it are the ninjas with the tools. And in COVID, we managed to put together somewhat of a room that and I mean that metaphorically. Sort of SPI-M doing their work and on the epidemiology. There's better data. The ONS infection survey is a great example of analysis and data. But that fundamental problem of we can't predict human behavior, we don't understand human behavior, was missing. And so after I left Number 10, I carried on just thinking about this, looking at different things, working on different projects. And it just annoyed me that we're so bad at this such crucial problem. We spend a lot of time talking about nuclear fusion. We talk a lot of time about quantum. Yeah. We actually spend, I don't know if you're out spare, no time thinking about human behavior, right? We actually can't predict human behavior. We don't know what works. In essence, I think that human behavior is probably at the same level as medicine in the medieval age. We're essentially bloodletting. We come up with these things. 50% of our papers don't reproduce.
Yeah.
Nobody really cares because nobody believed them anyway. And so it's just sort of like, okay, well, how can we start pushing forward and trying to pursue this problem? And actually, I don't think the best social science occurs in academia. I think if you look at COVID, actually the best predictors of human behavior were the ex-journalists, the comms guys, the people whose experience and skills had been trying to predict behavior. That's what they built their careers on. And so actually I think that you need to build actually close to those people, solving their problems, and that's actually how you build out how you understand human behavior. So it's about like science at the coalface, rather than science in sort of like a lab somewhere, and then telling people, oh, don't worry, I know now how it works. Actually, you need that to be trying to make predictions in that noise, etc. And so that's why I think it makes sense to do this as a company, because actually that's where you can do the best work, the most valuable stuff. And the great thing about human behavior is, as soon as you come up with something, as soon as you think of something, if you've got software, you can deploy it into the real world.
Yeah.
So we can sort of try something in electric twin, see the experiments working, and we can have a company using it within, experiment within days. There's no sort of, we've invented a laser, now let's spend the next 20 years miniaturizing it, industrializing it, and getting it into a CD player. So it's actually this really exciting field that I feel like nobody's exploring.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I did my master's was in cognitive and decision sciences, and like very quickly you realise that human behaviour, or in this case like sciences of the brain, it's like basically 50 years old, and it's such like it's a fundamental part of what we do as an individual and as a species, like the brain, how we act, why we act. It's really understudied. And you have these like just fundamental issues, right, of in the sciences, in the actual academic world, where you have this problem of you ask people questions, similar no doubt as well. We'll probably get into like the surveys. People will think people are just really bad at knowing what they think they feel, and you have this like really weird, like difficult scenario, right, where you're doing scientific studies saying this is what we believe people actually think, and this is how we think they'd act in these scenarios. But actually, when you put it in a real world context, this is not how they do it. And that's the kind of stuff that you're talking about, the journalists and people like the coalface who experience it and see it. That's like actual closer to the truth.
Yeah, it's just incredibly exciting times. I think your way of saying it, 50 years. Yeah, it's a science of 50 years. Imagine that means we're in, can't remember when Newton was, 1600s, 1700s. Like that's the era of science. Like it's such an amazing possibility, but in some ways we sort of we remove people from that pioneer spirit by sort of like almost pretending, we're as good as physics, but we're not. And it's super exciting times. I also think that it's so useful being in London for that, because actually we're at the heart. The government sits in London, finance sits in London. our creative industries, our sort of thing sits in London, our tech industries in London. So it's like the best place to build a human behavior company. If I was in the US, I'd have, we could be building in San Francisco. If I wanted to talk to a company, I've got to go to Los Angeles for the cultural center, New York for the finance center, Washington for the government center. But instead in London, everyone's there. We can be talking to them. We can sell to these different companies. We can be talking to some of the best media companies, the best cultural companies in the world, all in one day, sort of on a 15-minute tube ride. And I think that's an unbelievable advantage of London that we rarely talk about.
You're very positive about London as a kind of almost making it sound like quite a beacon for startups or scale-ups and young companies. Do you think that there is stuff in a wider UK context that's going wrong with the way that we support our tech companies?
Oh, of course. But I think
You're being too positive.
So
I'm
no,
sorry.
I think that you can still be very positive, and I think I've said it's definitely true of London, but I think that's not necessarily true of other areas of the country because of what I've said. It's in London, therefore, you could, if you use that argument for anywhere else, it's not true. Fundamentally, though, I think that sometimes what we do is when we fixate on tech or AI companies, we sort of start trying to solve a specific sort of issue in a very complex system. It's a bit like, if you're thinking about, you're trying to become healthy after an injury and you just do physio on your leg. Well, actually, you're going to get injured again because actually you need to strengthen the whole self. So I actually think a lot of the time when we fixate on AI or the tech sector, actually, what we want to do is just make it a good place to run a company, be a good place to live, right? An employee who has, is not worried about who can get GP appointment quickly, can be back in work quickly. All these factors. So I think actually for me, we can't fixate too much on I worry maybe we need to fixate on AI, obviously, but we also need to fixate on just being a great place to build a company, a great place to live. And that in itself, I think, will end up giving us this a fantastic ecosystem. Whereas if you just fixate on one small thing and not on fixing the other stuff, I think what you'll see is people will leave, talent will leave, and then the things won't work.
I guess for many, though, the potential that the UK tech sector has is somewhat of a kind of beacon of hope and kind of like the kind of growing your way out of decline kind of theory that LFG is quite paired with. The tech sector does seem kind of like, okay, well, if we can fix that, obviously all I'd say other industries that we have in the UK, I struggle to think of many more than FS, unfortunately, at the moment. But it kind of acts as this kind of maybe we can get out of decline by using our incredible IP that we get out of our universities and good people and
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're very lucky with what we have. Like you say, universities, UCL, King's, Imperial, they're cracking universities for a country to have. We haven't even mentioned Oxford and Cambridge, right? We're really lucky. There's also other, very, very good universities that specialize in different things. That it's not just the sort of Golden Triangle universities. And then we also have just very good people want to come and live in London. Right, so we have all the potential that we need. We also have the leading AI company owned by Google, but DeepMind is still built in the UK with UK, the people who live in the UK. These are fantastic assets to have. So I think, yes, we need to do more to be to improve things and to carry on making sure that we are at least the third best country in the world at AI. I don't think we should stop at saying we are just going to try and be the third best. I think it's hard, but I don't think there's any reason why we should just set our sights on the third place. But then I think we also need to be positive about what we have achieved, what is in the UK, because actually, if you look at a football match, it's not the crowd who's supporting the team that's 1-0 down that's cheering. It's the crowd that's 1-0 up. And so sometimes I think we just sort of look down, we're pessimistic, etc., rather than just being enthusiastic about what the UK, the tech, the London startups are doing, and then building on that, because I think that's actually the way to get people to behind you. If you say, look at all the success we've had, put a bit more in and we'll get more success, I think that's a much better argument than, oh, look how bad it is. But if we fix these 3 things, it won't be as bad.
Yeah, yeah. And how, like, from a startup side, it's really interesting that the ecosystem in the UK of the startup, because you have like the regulatory differences, and obviously there's elements of like our regulation which is complex, but a lot of the kind of stuff when I talk to people, they say actually our regulation isn't too dissimilar to the US. There's some nuances difference, but like that isn't the big restrictor. The big restrictor seems to be from people of like capital, access to capital at certain stages, but also like the maybe just like wider inertia in the system of people being more cautious about adopting new stuff. Do you find that from your side of being like, obviously you're breaking into a new frontier entirely, right? You're ultimately trying to compete electric twin with kind of surveys and something which feels very innately human, right? You want perspectives from what people think. How could an AI ever compete with that? Do you find that's like one of the big hurdles that you need to get past of for people to be like, oh, I'm willing to try a new thing and take that risk? And you kind of see a risk aversion in the wider culture of the UK, or is also that kind of overplayed?
I don't think it's overplayed. I think that there is probably a less risk-taking culture in the UK than the US. I think that's probably just true. Our science advisor actually Electric Twin is Michael Murakrishna, who studies this. So we
fair.
could just message him and check, is it actually
Phone a
true?
friend.
Because this is one of the things that I think is funny, is we talk about some of these things, but actually we could just test it, right?
Yeah.
Because we can actually just, survey the US population, survey the English population, survey the founders in the UK and find this out.
Yeah.
We don't know,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
this is it's a solvable thing. I suggest we should do it. So there is that cultural difference to the US, and I do think that plays in. I do think it plays into founders, and I think a lot of people concentrate on how do we get great founders in the UK, rightly. But I also actually don't think that is our biggest concern. Actually, I think we have great founders, and we have. I actually think where it affects us more in the UK is getting very good, sort of, say, talent from sort of 1 to 20. I think it's interesting how when you talk to quite a lot of UK startups, when they have a sort of senior person who's joined quite early, often they're American.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of risk-taking of those other employees who roll in behind the founders, I think that's a bit of the conversation which isn't talked about. And I
I
also
guess
think
that's kind of, that might be to do with your personal risk capital as well, right?
Yeah.
So if you like, job market's hard in the UK. If this fails, are you going to take a lower pay cut? What for potential payoff in 3 years?
exactly, and I know I don't know what the solution to that is, but I think the reason is quite right, and so I think that actually has an effect. I also think that we're just. I don't know if we're a generation later than the US, or the best people have moved to the US, but I don't think we have the same level of people rolling through to their second or third successful startup. I think that really, it's really important that when we talk about entrepreneurs leaving the UK, they move their companies, but I actually think that's maybe less important than actually that mentorship, that experience that they provide to the next generation of talent coming through. I mean, I'm very lucky that sort of like my brother's gone through this, that that I've got some friends who have been.
It's very contagious, isn't it? Like,
yeah, exactly. Success is contagious. It almost certainly, and it allows you to avoid mistakes as well. And so, and so that's a thing that I think is really important. And then there is a difference in the risk taking of companies. We see some of our US clients. It feels easier to sell to them. Rather than in the UK, whether that's actually true or that's just a perception, I think that's difficult to tell.
Do you think that's potentially also, to bring it back to the risk capital that actually corporates have as well? I mean, I talk to a lot of UK corporates. Their main concern doesn't seem to be kind of how. I think it's changing a bit now, but not necessarily how can we innovate to have the best product? It's how can we innovate to cut costs for ourselves, and in the US, you kind of see more, we want to innovate for the best kind of product. So in 5 years' time, we're kind of known and we're going to get business through that. But it seems to be a lot more kind of short-termism. But because they're almost forced to, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
like they don't have that money to invest.
I don't know. I
necessarily.
think for I'm lucky enough that I get to interact with some really innovative, really good people in UK companies and then really good people in the US companies. I think probably the reason why we find it easier to sell into the US is because most of our presence in the UK. So if somebody knows about us, they're just they're sort of higher along the sort of the sort of further down the buying cycle, if you will, or funnel, and so that's why selection bias. But yeah, I do think that we have some really good companies doing some really good stuff in the UK. Even the enterprise companies, they do at times move incredibly fast, sometimes faster than small startups. So I wouldn't lump them all into one thing. I do have a sort of. I'm not going to go out there and throw shade at all our customers.
No, not at all. I find it fascinating because you have this. It feels like this dance kind of going on where you have there's a desire for capital, like ignoring the wider government policies and and obviously that's a huge part of the equation. But you have your institutional investors or your large VCs, angel funders and stuff. And the feeling I get when talking to these people is. They want the right founders, they want the right team because they know if they don't get that, it's probably not going to succeed. And then you've got people who want to found, but they're falling into these problems access to capital, access to good people as well. People, like you say, your first 20 employees, what can I offer them? And it feels like everyone's being kind of cautious because naturally there is less liquidity, there's less kind of... they can't play with the same stuff you do in the US, right? Where you can bet big on a bunch of areas just because the scale out there is so much larger. And it's this awkward dance. I don't quite know the way of getting out of it. But obviously success stories, your kind of company succeeding, doing well, kind of pushing the beacon or kind of highlighting the success and how it's working is one way of doing it because crudely people want in on that, right? So you get people who are then are like, oh wait, actually I'd like to fund the next electric twin, and therefore I'm willing to take a bit more risk. As you say, founders then look at you as well.
I 100% agree with that. I think the easiest thing we could do in the UK is just for the government to talk about all the great case studies it's doing with UK firms. It's mental, the number of UK firms that I talk to, they're startups, they've got some unbelievably good case studies of work they've done with government, obviously particularly around defence. They're not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so suddenly these companies just we're leaving probably billions of pounds of investment on the table through a sort of, sort of security. And there is a security factor. I'm not, don't want to go over the top of that, but if we just shout about our startups more and be positive about startups, Keir Starmer went over to Canada and signed a sort of memorandum of understanding with Conjecture, a Canadian firm, and the government announced it. I would say that it's probably better for the UK for them to be announcing their stuff they've done with British firms and supporting the British firms, and maybe when they go to Canada, helping British firms sell to Canada. Yeah. That would be, I would say, a more useful and positive way of encouraging the ecosystem that's basically for free. And there isn't, I'm not going to say everyone in government doesn't do that, but when you actually look at it, a lot of what government talks about is its big deals with international firms, not here's how we're actually doing some really excellent work with UK startups, which they're doing all the time.
Yeah. I think politicians or the kind of Whitehall system, civil servants, etc., really undervalue it. Just the weight that can provide. If you factor in the fact of a startups often do a lot of free work with organizations to get exposure, and one of the kind of core audiences or core influencers you can have is actually politicians, as kind of dry as they are, etc., or can be. Actually, to say the Secretary of State was at my startup, was at an event, was speaking about us, is really good signal for other companies to go, oh, they must be serious then. They must be something to look into. That authority symbol is huge.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, anytime a startup stands on a stage with a customer that gives them credibility, it's incredible. The CMO of the Times talked about the work they've done with Electric Twin. Lots of people technically this is amazing, companies, because it shows credibility, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's not just about the work the government did. They can also showcase some of those sort of things and try and get, British companies, to your point on sort of enterprise, that's a great example of an innovative UK startup working with, one of the most internationally renowned brands in the world. Like, that's a great sort of best of Britain. Is that a bit of cliche? It's a bit of a, like, but it's a really nice.
Cool.
It's just a really nice example, and I call out what the examples that I do, mainly because I want people to know about them, but also because I just think it's a nice example, and those sort of things are going on all the time across our tech sector. Innovative UK startups working with innovative British companies, and actually highlighting them. Using the sort of voice that government has to talk about them. I think is just really powerful. And free.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, I don't know, I think there's a lot of caution in government of like, it always comes with either an expectation of money or, fears of corruption, which are overplayed and stuff like this. And you're completely right. Like, it's free. It's good for both sides, right? It's good for the government to be highlighting we're actually doing this.
You're creating
doing really
jobs
cool work.
there.
We're actually funding X company, like, to improve the UK, to build stuff.
Yeah.
And that's just good PR.
Yeah,
It
it's
feels
really
like
cool. We often don't talk about the success stories in government. Even government doesn't talk about its own success stories. And I think that just sort of feeds back into this pessimism.
So we've talked about electric twin a little bit, but we actually haven't kind of outlined exactly what it is. And we've touched on the periphery. It'd be great if you could just give a kind of, not to ask you for your 30-second pitch on electric twin, but it would be great to kind of just hear what it is it offering. Why do you think it's kind of an important thing to do?
Yeah, so as we sort of briefly touched on, understanding, people's behavior, what they care about, what they understand is really difficult. You can use a survey, and I said we can do the survey of America and the different founders. But that would actually be really expensive. That would cost us probably £20,000-30,000 if we used our contacts as well, and it would take us maybe 6 weeks to get the results back. That means that most of the time, we just don't do that research. Actually, we guess. And so the idea of electric twin is, well, how can you get access to answer those type of questions, but in seconds, so you can ask the next question? So what we do is we use real-world data to create synthetic audiences that you can then ask as many questions as you want of and get answers back in 10 seconds. And we've actually shown that by running 7 identical surveys in the UK and pre-predicting the results we're using in the electric twin engine, that our results are as accurate as traditional methods.
That's astonishing. Yeah, that's like, obviously we won't talk about the actual how the system operates and things. It's obviously all proprietary, but like to be able to, like, this is a big thing about the accuracy, and I always find really interesting as well of like, humans themselves are quite unreliable, shall we say. It's like you spend a lot of money on surveys, so you can do if you're going to invest in that, and actually the science behind it can be a bit ropey, etc. So the fact that you have a system where you can like really build, what I find very interesting is like there is no real upper limit, and it feels like there is an upper limit with surveys in the traditional sense. Like, people always have this inbuilt error rate, they have these inconsistencies, they have issues of methodology, etc. But this system, you ultimately can keep tweaking, can keep adapting, can create almost an infinity number of different scenarios and different ways you could run it, and that's fascinating. And how does from like your side, right? You're using really frontier models, you're using kind of state-of-the-art AI systems, and how you're integrating it, and more widely, you're looking at a sector in AI where you've got very kind of polarizing views forming. People who are concerned about the risks of AI, people who are talking about like it's bubble time, any moment we're going to have 50% stock drop in NVIDIA, to then the other side where it's like we should double down because productivity is going to be 100%, or we're going to reach abundance and we're going to be living in utopia. What is, like, as a company who's using this, selling it, pitching it to companies, how do you, like, is this all just noise that you're like, pay enough and don't pay attention to it, we need to carry on our path? Or is this something which like materially kind of influences your company, your day-to-day?
It definitely is. It's not noise. I mean, I think people are really excited about AI, and I don't mean that people as investors. I think that means all of us in our everyday lives. Like we're really excited about, like we're all probably using these workplace assistants to help us in our jobs, etc. And so that sort of wave is great for electric twin, great for helping us to sort of show that you can really work in this completely different fashion. And really get this 100,000 times speed up, which sounds crazy. If somebody said to you, "Do you want to speed up your workflow by 100,000?" You'd be like, "Yes, please." So I think that's phenomenal, and that's also built. But a lot of the work we're doing is also based on the huge investments that these massive hyperscalers are making in allowing us to scale LLMs in the way we interact with the LLMs in the way we do, etc. So it's definitely something that we always have to be considering and thinking about as we're sort of building out. In terms of sort of like the risks, I think it's really important when you're an AI company that you're thinking about how do you build a company right. I think that's true of any company, but I think especially with AI where it's this newer thing. So we have an ethics board in place just to make sure that we are trying to build right. But I think it's really important that we also do make sure we're building these companies. Like actually, I think that if Electric Twin had been around in COVID, it would have helped mitigate some of the harms that occurred. So I think that's the other side to this. And it's really important that we are building right, but we are also building them.
Yeah, this is and like Electric Twin, I find because you're dealing with this, you're kind of dealing in frontiers in two dimensions, right? You're dealing with frontier of AI systems and what they can actually do and provide, and how they can act as synthetic audiences. But you're also in a frontier of like what people, how people act, how you can best predict what people are going to do. And just like your COVID example there, right? Electric Twin in COVID could be an amazingly helpful tool. Also, if it could steer you in the wrong direction. So as someone who's running a company, it's like that is to make sure that your product is delivering trustworthy stuff and is reliable, etc. Must be a kind of a core component of your mission, your drive.
Yeah, we spend an awful lot of time, money, and energy on making sure that our predictions are accurate. For us, I think it's easier, to be honest with you, actually. And the reason I say that is that we spend a huge amount of time evaluating with our customers. We do bespoke evaluations all the time. But we do all that work because as soon as we put it into the hands of customers, the first thing they're going to do is test it, right?
Yeah.
So actually, if we don't do all that work, they're going to do that work anyway and point us that it doesn't
Naturally,
work.
as a human, if you got hold of it right,
Exactly.
you'd have hours of fun.
Yeah, exactly. We know that. Everyone does it. And the number of people that have, that's the first thing everyone does. And so actually, we're quite lucky in that doing the right thing is also the right thing from a sort of customer perspective, from selling a customer, which makes some of these decisions much easier.
Yeah, that's nice. You get it as a centre of the line, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And how do you see, like, as you say, like we need to be building these things, we need to be leaning into it. We need the UK you mentioned earlier about trying to, number 3, bronze medal is all right to aim for. No reason we can try more, at least to be on the ambitious side. Do you think right now we're set up? We are in that realm. What do you think the thing is lacking to get us up higher? Because not to be pessimistic, I like the optimism in the room, but it doesn't feel like we're even aiming for bronze right now. It feels like we're happy to watch a race and sit back.
Was it 6% unemployment today?
Yeah. And then you've got these negative wins on the other side, right? So you've got unemployment risks, people concerned about that. Becca's breaking her mic.
Yeah, sorry.
Need an AI mic stand. Yeah. So how do you? You've thrown me off now, Becca. What's the where was I going with this?
About how do we sort of push things forward, make sure we're in third place?
That's right. Yeah. Where's the gap we need to fill?
So, I think that we have to be very careful to try and wish for the AI sector we want rather than the AI sector we can have. And by that, I think that there is a lot of how do we improve the country? What do we do for sort of areas which have huge poverty, etc. But that is not going to be AI companies are not going to rectify that. You know, you're not going to be able to be like, okay, let's see if we can, you know, move very talented people away from, you know, where their friends, their families, where they own houses, where the other jobs in the ecosystems are. So I think one of the things we have to do is not to think that we have any element of control. You know, we spent ages trying to do Silicon Roundabout and everyone just pissed up the road to King's Cross. They're not moving, you know.
Wait, what was Silicon Roundabout? I think I missed that. What was
Silicon Roundabout was a sort of I don't know if it's, to be fair, it might be a thing. It was a sort of initiative. I must have been in the coalition days of sort of trying to make a tech system around Old Street.
Oh, okay, cool.
And then, you know, I do think startups are around Old Street, etc. But actually, you know, when you look at where the big
where we want to go, it's not.
Is King's
We do a lot of that managed systems, right?
And I think
like,
that's
you will all exist here now.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think that's the wrong way to think about it. So we need to make sure we're investing in our top tier universities, and that means the top tier universities. That doesn't mean the top tier universities in the locations that we want. I also think it means that we are properly funding government science, government initiatives. You know, sort of. You know, obviously our intelligence agencies, but other areas of government, so they're properly investing at the scale they need to be. That doesn't mean the NHS spending 10 million on an innovative around AI. That probably means hundreds of millions. So I think we need to have that scale of ambition. And to do that, that means also working better with private sector companies and British private sector companies. And we have to be really careful as well that we don't just sort of like take short-term gains of just sort of like, oh, let's just use OpenAI. Look at the great work we're doing with the pilot of OpenAI. We need to make sure that it's British companies we're building with, because that gives the British company the case studies to go sell into America. And so I think it's about making sure that we're, you know, really thoughtful in how we use government money in government, in universities, and then about sort of just creating the right ecosystem wherever that is, and then really sort of over the time when we're, you know, we have this sort of flywheel of success, then we can start thinking about other stuff. But, you know, it's sort of a bit like planning. There's lots of stuff you'd love to do. Let's just work out how we build fast first. Then we can do everything else. And I think it's similar. I think we could make the mistakes that we've made in lots of other areas again in AI. And that means just sort of essentially just taking some of the pain that we would all love not to exist, but just to make sure that we don't lose it.
Yeah, it's very similar actually to Max, who was on podcast a couple of months ago. From his side, he was talking about like data. This is mainly focusing on defense, but ultimately like data sovereignty, and the idea that we send vast amounts of our data over to America, etc. And we lose that autonomy then. We lose that ownership. And similar to what you're saying about, like, you know, sending it over to OpenAI, we should be like, what can we do internally? How do we actually invest in it? How do we support our homegrown stuff? Partly, let the market.
Definitely. I think it's not just the data, but it's the learnings, right? It's the learnings of how do you work with a large enterprise organization, the learning of how you do the procurement. It's the learning from working with the end users and sitting next to those end users and discovering their problems and finding out about their problems and having the resources to then go out and then solve those problems as part of the contract. So I think sometimes, you know, we start talking about these things in a really sort of into a technocratic thing of, oh, it's about the data and everything. Actually, quite often for startups, it's just sitting next to a person who really understands their problem and trying to solve it for them. And that's really valuable. And that's what we need to make sure that we are also enabling UK startups to do. Because actually, if we're just letting, you know, sort of OpenAI or Anthropic or these type of companies do sort of £0 contracts just to learn, the opportunity, there is an opportunity cost to that. Now, obviously, you know, there isn't infinite resources in government. It would be lovely if government could just give every startup £1 million. I'm not, you know, naive enough to think that there's a rainbow, you know, pot of gold at the end of this sort of AI rainbow. But I do think those type of things are just really important. And that's actually where the sort of, if we look at where the unicorns of the UK are going to come from, they're probably going to come from interactions like that. So every time we lose one of those interactions, we're just losing that chance. It's only a small chance ever, right? Every time it's a roll of the dice. But every roll of the dice, I think we just need to be taking.
Yeah, it's a fascinating difference, right, as well, because you have a startup, for instance, who that interaction with government or a customer is so huge, and like so that can sometimes be the turning point in like the organization of like, oh, this is actually now we've got product market fit, or we've able to kind of maybe the organization turns into an actual client, paying client, etc. Whereas you got your OpenAI, your Anthropics, who can go in and say, "Well, give us for free, government. Of course we can." It doesn't feel like it feels like we should be more suspicious of that, or at least more concerned about that, because you lose that whole market now.
Yeah, of course. Now you say it, I also think that we also have to be really careful that we're not suspicious of big tech and government, because we've got huge problems. We need to solve them, and actually you need the problems. You need the companies that have the scale to solve some of these problems, which is why it's a really hard problem. But it is a complicated problem. But yeah,
it's a difficult balance. No, I haven't really thought about it kind of from that angle. I've been very much on the idea of like, great, organizations going in, helping sorting a bunch of the productivity problems we've got makes a lot of sense. But equally, yeah, I do think there's a bigger cost than just like, oh, it's a 1-for-1 trade. Yeah. One customer for OpenAI or Anthropic compared to one customer for a startup.
But there's ways you can work, right? You can just make sure that there is a UK company involved in that company.
Yeah.
Right. So you can say, yeah, OpenAI, you can work with us. Obviously, that's great. They're a phenomenal, world-class company. But also you have to bring in, these other companies as part of that, so that they are learning, so that they are thinking, so that like some of that learnings, but also some of that learnings from working with AI, because obviously working alongside them and their engineers and stuff is a hugely valuable thing. So then we're just, instead of sort of like it almost seeming like we're sort of seeping value out, actually we're gaining huge amounts of experience and things. So it's just about sort of, we just need to be making sure that we are always looking, how do we create this as an opportunity? How do we create this as an opportunity to create the next UK company, to create another UK company, to help that UK company grow, to help that UK sell internationally?
Yeah. No, fantastic. I think that's a great pitch. Yeah. I think we've got to wrap up in a minute, but we'd like to finish on kind of the pessimistic, optimistic question. Becca, if you want to actually ask it properly.
I mean, you've covered a lot of it already, I think, but I guess so. If you have anything new, any gems you haven't given,
I've just said.
What are you most pessimistic about with the UK? What are you most optimistic about? In that order, so we can end on a nice way.
Yeah, nice high note.
Get really dark,
I think the NHS is where I'm most pessimistic. It's such a hard thing to solve. It's hundreds. I don't know, I was going to say hundreds of thousands. That's just probably in London working. Yeah, this huge organisation with a very obscure structure. I don't really understand what GP surgery is, how that works, all the way to social care. So you've got this huge, complex problem that really isn't working right now. And to solve that, I think, is so hard, especially with the you just can't, you for every single person in the NHS right now, they need their care to be as good as it can be right now. You can't be like, oh, it's going to be bad for 2 years, but...
Yeah.
I think you can kind of see as well, like think tanks barely touch it.
Exactly.
I mean, like
so
no one know what...
It's just really... Yeah. It's an incredibly hard problem, but we have to fix it. I think that, if we don't sort of fix something, we will end up turning it from the sort of the national treasure into the weight that brings down the nation. And I think that just how you do that, I have no ideas, which is why I'm probably most pessimistic. In terms of why I'm most optimistic, it's things like the Looking for Growth event with Matt Clifford speaking. I think seeing people like him. We talked about the need for experienced startups, people who have set up companies to be out there, sort of mentoring. It's great to see somebody like that talking on the stage, talking in a very different way, sort of talking about how we can make America rich again, talking about how doesn't want to see the people that he's mentoring and helping set up move off to San Francisco. He wants to build them back here. And then that room full of people who turned up on a Thursday night to hear that type of thing. Usually people are there for rock concerts. Matt is not. He's not a rock star, but I think that's really optimistic. People care. And actually the first thing for sort of turning things around and pushing things forward is really talented people caring and going after it. And I think that event just demonstrated that does exist in the UK.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, no, we're obviously very glad you enjoyed it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been fantastic to talk about all these topics. Love what you're doing. And thank you so much for your time.
Cheers.
Pleasure.